Okay, last exam, English language paper 2, non-fiction and transactional writing. Over the next half an hour or so, I'm going to talk you through exactly what you need to know for the exam tomorrow. So get your pen and paper ready. Here we go. Key things to know about the exam tomorrow. So you were going to have two passages which are going to be non-fiction from different centuries, and they're going to be linked by theme. We've had all sorts of themes come up before. We've had education, we've had crime, travel, storms, stormy weather, people overcoming adversity. We don't know what the theme's going to be, but we do know that they are going to be linked. We know that the first passage will always have questions 1 to 3 associated with it. We know that they have to use text 1 for those questions. We then know that the second passage will always have questions 4 to 6. And then question 7 will ask you to identify similarities, and 7b will ask you to compare the ideas and perspectives. There's a choice of 2 writing questions. You're quite familiar with this now. You would have seen this on English language paper 1. You have 2 choices and you have to answer on 1 question. And my big advice and my big thing that you need to know about the exam tomorrow is that you will have 2 hours and 5 minutes, which might feel like a marathon at the moment, but it really, really isn't. Make sure you leave enough time for all of those questions, especially that 40 marker at the end. The first thing that you need to do in the exam tomorrow is read that first passage. So once you get in there, you've opened up the question paper, make sure you navigate yourself to this first text and read it through. As you're reading, I want you to think about what things jump out to you. Highlight any of those interesting words or phrases, because they're going to be really useful when you have to do your language analysis, which is your question 3. So think about those techniques that you can identify. Think about any of those thoughts and feelings that the writer seems to have. Consider any of those tones or shifts that happen throughout the passage. And think about EDAC. Remember all of the things that we've taught you. So we've taught you to chunk your passage into 4 sections and think about how does the writer establish those ideas early on? How are those ideas then developed? Does it continue in the same idea? Does it shift? Does it introduce something new? Does it change the kind of atmosphere or tone? Think about the conclusion. So what are we left with? And then amplified's a funny one really with your non-fiction, because it might not be really, really clear. So think about the passage as a whole in terms of amplify. Is it amplified through the factual tone? Is it amplified through the statistics? Is it amplified through the factual kind of information that's given? You might not find a really obvious amplified. So it's your opportunity to look at the text as a whole and identify those semantic fields or kind of any of those whole text structural things that you might notice. So just note those down as you go through. So the first question mimics what you have seen in paper 1 already. So we know that we're going to have a short answer question, and it is going to ask you to identify 2 things that happen based on the given lines. We know this from paper 1. We know that we need to just literally identify the information and write it out exactly as it appears in the text. You don't need to put it into your own words. You can if you want to, but you don't need to. You don't need to write it as a sentence, and you don't need to do anything other than identify the word or phrase in the text that answers the question and write it directly onto your answer paper. Highlight the key bit that you're looking for, box in the lines or highlight the lines, or make sure that it's really, really clear on your exam paper, and then write it out exactly. For question 2, again, it is exactly the same. Highlight the answers within the given lines. They will print this for you, so it will be right in front of you on your answer booklet. Think about what the question's asking you. So in this example, it's give 2 feelings the writer has following the accident. I've pre-highlighted the words there that I found in the extract, and then I'm just going to literally copy them into the paper. Question 3, our first high tariff question. This is where we're going to start picking up all of those lovely marks that are going to get us our beautiful, beautiful grade 5s and above. It's our language and structure question, so it's a question that you are very familiar with. You will be very used to picking out techniques and talking about those effects. For this paper, it's non-fiction, so it might be slightly harder to identify those techniques used by the writer because we're very used to the literature style question, so we're very used to the fiction side of things. So what we need to remember is all of those non-fiction techniques that you've been taught. So for example, if you are struggling to find kind of language techniques that are there, think about DeForest. Remember, look in DeForest, and these are the rhetorical devices that are used in transactional writing. So DeForest is direct address. So anything the writer is doing to kind of talk to you as the reader. Anecdotes, so are they using personal stories? Are they using somebody else's story to think about and illustrate their point? Any facts and statistics, any kind of opinions of experts, so they might refer to if it's something about the environment, they might be referring to David Attenborough, they might be referring to professors or doctors or historians or somebody that you might know. So you might remember from your mocks where we did the one about the whales and then the Loch Ness Monster, they referred to the natural history kind of experts. So that's something that you can pick out. We know to look for rhetorical questions, repetition, emotive language. So where are they kind of being hyperbolic? Where are they exaggerating? Where are they trying to pull on your heartstrings? There might be similes and metaphors, and quite often we might see things like triplets in there. So anything that you used for your own persuasive writing or your own transactional writing over the last few years, think about those techniques. And then in terms of answering this question, and again, I'm not going to apologize. This is not going to come as a surprise. I'm going to remind you of EDAC. Okay, so we're looking at responding in terms of how the writer uses language and structure. We're thinking about how are those ideas established? So what do they do at the start? How do they introduce their ideas? How are they then developed? Where are those ideas amplified? And how do they conclude? Like, what are we left with as a reader? What are those final images or the final atmosphere or the final kind of takeaway that we've got? Because it is non-fiction and we are looking for that structure, think about how the text progresses throughout. You can talk about your techniques that we saw in paper 1. So you can talk about your sentence types in terms of your interrogatives, imperatives, declaratives, and your exclamatives. So they might be in there, they might not. You can talk about any sort of paragraphing structure. So if you do see a 1-sentence paragraph, sometimes that's really useful. You can also talk about witness statements. So you might often see like somebody being brought in to talk about what the author wants. So you can talk about that as well. The important thing to remember is that this is a 15-mark question. You don't want to spend any more than 20 minutes on it before you move on, because there are 3 high tariff reading questions. There's this question 3, there's question 6, which is our evaluate, and there's our question 7b, which is our viewpoints and perspectives comparison. So write as much as you can for this question, nail down your 4 paragraphs, establish, develop, amplify, concluded, and then move on. You could always come back to this. Okay, so we've worked with text 1 and now we're moving on to text 2. So once you've finished that high tariff question, the 15-marker language analysis and structure based on text 1, read text 2. And I want you just to follow the exact same process. So highlight any interesting words or phrases that jump out at you. Think about noting down any of the thoughts or feelings the writer seems to have. Look for those structural shifts. Look for the lovely kind of movement through the passage. Think about EDAC as you're reading. How are those ideas established, developed, amplified, concluded? Just make sure that you're prepping yourself so that you're using every second in the exam to make sure you're prepped for those big questions. I am not going to apologise for this lovely ringed and highlighted read text 2 comment that I've put here. It is so important that once you've done that 15-mark language question, you put text 1 to a side and you get text 2 out. It is absolutely imperative that you know that questions 4 to 6 are all based on text 2. To help you do this, you need to make sure that you read this question carefully, because it will ask you to find information from very early on in the passage. So for example, here it says from lines 1 to 5, identify one detail about the ladders. If you cannot find an obvious answer in the text you're looking at, you are looking at the wrong text. This question, I've put it in a box here for you, this question is literally designed to check you're working with the correct text for question 6. Okay, so these are two very, very short, simple identify questions. So they're 1 mark each, and it's making sure that you have the right text in front of you. I cannot implore to you enough, as one of the senior team for this paper, these 2 questions are designed to make sure you are working with the correct text. So please, please, please double check. If you're looking at it thinking there's nothing about ladders in text 1, that's because you're looking at the wrong text. It will be a really, really obvious answer. So make sure that you are checking your text. It should be obvious. It's not there to trip you up. It is not there to make you second guess. Is all you need to do is you need to identify the information in the lines that are given and write them out directly, like we've done in paper 1, like you've just done on text 1 in this paper. Find the quote, write it down. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to identify techniques. You are simply selecting the information from the text and writing it into your answer booklet. So question 6 is our high tariff question for text 2. We've answered on questions 1, 2, 3 on text 1. We've moved on. We've done our short questions 4 and 5 on text 2. And now this is the one where we're going to start picking up those lovely marks. So this is our evaluate question. And what it is asking you to do is make a critical judgment. So everything in the mark scheme talks about this idea of judgment, and you are teenagers, you have opinions. The one thing I will say, and it's the caveat that I gave you with question 1 when you had your paper 1, when you had your evaluate question, which is these people are published authors. If you want to say that they're not being successful, you do need to make sure you're giving that as a balanced judgment. So you need to make sure that you're also identifying how they have been successful, because it is a successful piece of writing, otherwise it wouldn't have been published. So we're thinking about this evaluate, we're thinking about what this text does well, and in order to do that, we are going to look at spite. So you will remember spite from the evaluate question. It's paper 1, question 4, and we've seen this where we're being asked to make a judgment. So we look at spite, which is setting. So we're thinking about where are the events taking place, when are they taking place, how does this kind of build up the tone and atmosphere. So for example, you will remember, I'm sure, doing the questions about the penguins in the Arctic, and then there was the hyenas in the desert on that same article, and the setting made it so desperately sad. And so we're looking for those ideas and settings that kind of really establish those feelings of tension or fear or anxiety. We're then thinking about, well, who's in the text. So for spite, we're looking at the people for our P. So who's narrating, who's writing it, what viewpoints do they have, how do they feel about this, how successful is it. So for example, we'll go back to the idea about the penguins, and it was about them being able to be moved to safety, and the people that then appeared to talk about that were the directors, but also then David Attenborough. So, you know, he was a credible source. If you think about the Loch Ness Monster one, you had historians who were talking about it. So in order to convey these feelings and kind of give credit to the text, the people in it are so significant. Ideas and themes come together, really. So the theme and the main idea will be given to you in the question. So thinking about, you know, what's the main idea of the passage? Well, it's probably what you're being asked to focus on, and how successful is that being conveyed throughout. So I tend to use it, as in ideas and themes, as my conclusion. So I will talk about the setting, the people, and then the events. So where is it set, who's in it, what's actually happening, to then draw together my conclusion about the ideas and themes. So how do the setting, people, and events create the successful ideas and themes of the passage. We're thinking about making our judgments. So when we're talking about setting, we're talking about the writer effectively establishes the theme of tension through the setting. The writer successfully develops those ideas through the people. The writer creatively uses the events of the passage to amplify the theme of tension. The writer masterfully concludes the passage through the ideas and themes, So you can see what I'm doing there. I'm using my Edexcel structure and using Spite together. So they're not two separate entities here. How does the writer establish the ideas? Through either setting, people, and events. How does the writer develop those ideas? Through the setting, people, and events. How does the writer amplify those ideas? Through the setting, people, and events. And how does the writer conclude those ideas? Through the setting, people, and events. And then finally, that idea of it being amplified or intensified through those things which successfully communicate the theme or the idea of the passage. So now we move on to our comparison section of this paper. We have work. So this paper is designed to step you through both of the texts and give you ideas. One of the things that a lot of pupils will ask me year on year is that they feel they're repeating themselves, but that's the way this paper is designed. So questions 1, 2, 3 will build you up to working with text 1. So you will have identified some information and then you will have analysed the language and the structure. You'll have then worked with text 2, where you've identified some information and then evaluated how successful it is. Question 7 begins to make you work with those texts holistically. So it's going to start quite simply with a 6-mark question, which is going to get you to think about identifying the similarities. And we know that it will always be the similarities. So the chief examiner for this paper has said that they will never change that. It's about making sure that you can make some quite obvious comparisons, which will give you something to write about in part B. My top tip for this question is C times 3. So SEE times 3, C times 3. And quite simply, what I'm asking you to do is state the first similarity. So in this case, it says, what similarities do the explorers Robert and Ben share in these extracts? So you would state the first similarity. So you would say something like, both explorers, Robert and Ben, are brave. Okay, so we're making a very simple comparative point. We're then going to use a quotation from text 1 to establish that. So we're going to say, in text 1, Robert is able to overcome his pain from breaking his ankle. We see this in the quotation, blah, 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 blah. We're then going to link it to a second quotation from text 2. So this is similar to Ben in text 2, where he overcomes the pain of his accident. We see this in the quotation, blah, 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 blah. You then repeat that. So a second similarity is blah, 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 blah. And then you quote from text 1, and then you link that to your quote from text 2, and then you repeat that for a third time. So the third similarity, using the exact words in the question, so the third similarity between Robert and Ben in these extracts is find your quote, find your quote. Okay, so it is a very, very simple structure for this answer, C times 3. We're going to state our similarity. We're going to use the evidence from text 1. We're going to use the evidence from text 2. This should be a very straightforward, very easy 6 marks. It is an AO1. So when we talk about our assessment objectives, this is a very simple identify and synthesize the information. So it shouldn't trip you up. You've worked with both of your texts before, so this should be almost something you can do quite quickly. You might almost be able to write the similarities without looking back at the texts, and then just making sure that we've given our evidence. Quite simply, and I probably shouldn't tell you this because it's an examiner's tip. We've got here this first C, that will get you 2 marks. Your second C will give you another 2 marks, that takes you up to 4. And your third C takes you up to another 2 marks, which gives you 6 marks. It is that simple. You don't need to overthink this question. You need to spend no more than sort of 9 minutes on this. So 2 minutes to make your similarity and find your evidence. It shouldn't be something that takes you that long. So this is our third big tariff question. This one is 14 marks. So you do need to be remembering to kind of keep your time on track at this point. So this is our third big question that we need to do. And this time we're looking at the ideas and perspectives and making a comparison between the 2 texts that you've been given. The ideas and perspectives part of this question means that it's not really about the effect on the reader. So it's almost counterintuitive because we spend so long talking to you about how does this make the reader feel? What is it that they're trying to achieve here? And actually, we kind of want to turn that on its head for this question. And we're not thinking necessarily about the effect on the reader, but more about what the writer is feeling as they're writing it. So rather than sort of saying, oh, you know, this makes the reader feel scared, or this makes the reader feel worried about what's happening, or this might upset a reader, we're thinking about actually what the writer's doing at that point. So the writer is feeling scared. The writer is trying to convey that sense of sadness or that sense of horror that they are feeling through the choices that they're making. We're thinking very carefully about how these ideas are presented. So, you know, what techniques is text 1 using lots and lots of facts and statistics to almost bombard the reader with that factual tone, whereas text 2 might be using lots of emotive language, so trying to get us to respond in a way that as a reader we feel sympathy or empathy. I think the biggest thing that people worry about with this question is how to structure it. And I go back to everything that I have taught you over the years. Think about EDAC. So yes, you're working with 2 texts, but we're still looking at exactly the same structure for our essay. So we are thinking about how do those 2 writers establish their viewpoints. So what are those viewpoints? So in text 1, is the writer feeling scared? Okay, good. How does he establish that? Well, then maybe a similarity might be the author in text 2 is also feeling scared, which is brilliant because then we can say, well, both writers start with the sense of fear. They're both clearly feeling scared about the situation they're in. However, they might convey those ideas differently. So they might both be scared, but one might be using lots of emotive language, whereas the other one might use an anecdote. One might be using rhetorical questions, whereas one might be using direct address. So they might be trying to achieve the same thing. They might just be going about it in a separate way. Once we've done a lovely paragraph comparing how they establish their ideas, we're going to make a second paragraph which then compares the way they develop their ideas. So do they develop in similar ways? So do they both continue on with that fear and that sense of being scared? Or does one continue being scared and one find some courage and bravery? Do they use different techniques? Do they use similar techniques? Where are we finding these lovely things that we can talk about? And as we know, amplify comes next. So how are those feelings that the writer has, how are they amplified? So is that through a progressive increase of fear? Is it through a semantic field of terror? Is it through really emotive language? Is it through similes and metaphors or rhetorical questions? Are they both the same, or are there any differences between them? And lastly, we're thinking about, okay, so how are we left? What do the writer leave us with? What do they want us to know about their experiences as they conclude their article or their letter or their speech or whatever it is they're going to give you? What's the kind of prevailing tone here? Does the first author who established fear at the start, do they continue with that fear? Does the second author move from fear to bravery and then back to fear? How do they compare to each other? So the big thing to remember about this particular question is not to be intimidated by it. There are the techniques that we've taught you in terms of structuring your responses to these styles of questions, and it just follows that very, very familiar format. How are the ideas established? How are they developed? How are they amplified? How are they concluded? It's just that you're working with two texts. So if you remember, I always say to you, a perfect paragraph will have at least 2 quotations. In this case, it's exactly the same, except for you've got a quotation from text 1 and you've got a quotation from text 2. Ideally, you would have 4. So ideally, you're working with 2 quotations from text 1 and 2 quotations from text 2, both looking at kind of consolidating your argument about how they're feeling. But we're following that same technique. So I don't want you to worry about this question. You know how to answer it. Just thinking about how they do things slightly differently. So you have completed your first 7 questions on this paper, and we move to our writing question. There are 5 different formats that this can take. The first one is a letter. And the top tip here is you don't need to worry about addresses. You can if you particularly want to, but you don't get any additional marks for it. You do, however, need a salutation. So a dear sir, dear madam, dear Mr. Wilkes, dear Mrs. Wilderspin, dear Mr. Starmer, whoever it is that you're writing to. And you must have a conclusion. So you must sign off yours sincerely or yours faithfully. You could get asked to write a speech. My top tip here is make sure you acknowledge your audience. So, hi, Year 11, I'm here today to talk to you all about the importance of school, or, following the rules, or whatever it is that you're asked to do. And then thank you, Year 11, for listening to me whilst I've talked to you today about the importance of following the rules. You might be asked to write a section of a guide or a guidebook. The top tip here is be aware of who your reader is. You can use subtitles. So, for example, you could be asked to write a section of a guidebook for students about surviving their first year at school. So you know that then you're writing for potentially Year 6 students, and so you're going to want to break that information down for them. Use subtitles. You can be witty, you can be humorous, or you can be factual. It doesn't matter. But really to kind of organising your ideas. You might be asked to write a review. You will probably remember this from the mocks. It was one of those ones that was actually quite challenging because the question itself was asking you to review an unusual event, which was quite tricky because it led you down that very narrative viewpoint. And so the thing about a review to remember is that when you're reviewing something, you are rating it, you're judging it. So if I was to review the latest film that I've watched, I would perhaps think about giving it a mark out of 5. So I'd say, my goodness, now I'm trying to remember the last film that I've watched. Top Gun Maverick. I might give it a 5 out of 5 because I'm an absolute diehard Top Gun fan, and therefore I found it really lovely that they put Val Kilmer in it, and I loved the fact that it was so true to the original film, and I might be bringing out all of those ideas. But the most important thing is that I give it a judgment. So we kind of go back to that evaluation. Again, you could put it into subtitles. So you could look at cinematography, you could look at the soundtrack, the music, the props, the costume, the casting. So you could put those into sections. If you were reviewing perhaps going to a concert, a lot of you know I went to watch Coldplay in August last year, and it was like the most incredible experience of my life. But I might put that down to in terms of subtitling it, I might put down, kind of arriving at Wembley, going in, being quite intimidated by all the crowds that were there, the incredible opening that they had. Then I might have like the use of the fireworks that they did. I might talk about their warm-up acts. You might have done something similar. You might be involved in a surfing kind of competition. So you might review, what it was like when you arrived, how you look after your board, all those sorts of things. But the most important thing is that you are rating it, that you are casting a judgment, and you're trying to remember that when you're reviewing something, you're trying to convince somebody of your viewpoint. So if I was going to rate my I was going to review my experience of going to watch Coldplay at Wembley, I might talk about the fact that I might try and convince you that it is the most incredible thing, and if you can ever possibly get to go to watch them live, absolutely go. You might be asked to write an article, and for this one I want you to think very carefully about who your audience is. So are you being asked to write an article for your local newspaper, your school magazine, a national newspaper? Is it an article that you would find in a music magazine or a farming magazine or a sporting and extreme sporting magazine? Because that's going to really dictate the tone that you take. It's going to really dictate the sorts of ways that you're communicating. So you need to think really carefully here. If you're asked to write an article, who are you writing it for? And it might not be clear. You might need to make that really obvious in your title that you choose for your article. You might need to make that really obvious in that first paragraph that you write. Who are you writing for? Because really, for all of these 5 formats, for the letter, the speech, the guide, the review, or the article, the most important thing that you are marked on is, can you write appropriately for the purpose that you're writing for the audience that you're writing for, and do you know how that looks? And the most marks, genuinely the most marks, come from that relationship that you're building with the audience. So who is your reader? Who is going to be listening to you or reading your letter or reading your article? And how do you try to engage them with that? 2 really quick examples for you to illustrate this. This is the paper that I've just used to show you, and the 2 questions that were here was, write an article for a magazine about traveling to different places. In your article you could include, and then it's going to give you 3 bullet points. And what I want you to remember is that those bullet points are there to guide you. It says you could include, it doesn't mean you have to. So they're there if you're struggling to think about the sorts of things to write about, not to mandate what you write about. So you can completely ignore them. If you've got your own ideas and you read that and you think, absolutely, I know where I want to write about, I know where I want to talk about, I know what I want to say, that's fine. You don't need to use these as a sort of a straitjacket. You can be quite exploratory with what you're doing. If you were to get something like this and you sort of think, oh, well, I haven't really been anywhere different, I haven't been anywhere that people would want to read about, I just want to remind you about where you live, and where you go to school. You go to school in Bude, which is right next to a beach. I used to work in an inner city, so where I used to live, they had never been to the beach. They had never been to the sea. They'd never seen the moors. They'd never seen cliffs. We took them on a trip, and we actually ironically brought them down to Boscastle, and they walked from Boscastle to Crackington Haven, and they literally thought they were walking mountains. So if you get something about your local area or travel or anything like that, please remember how wonderfully unique your situation is. The fact that you live in this most incredible place, and whether you're local to Bude or you're in one of the outlying villages, or you're sort of Holsworthy or Heartland or Tintagel or Wheat St Mary, or I'm really sorry if I haven't mentioned where you live, but any of these beautiful, beautiful places, when it talks about traveling to different places or your local area, just remember how much you have to say because of where you live, and don't underestimate that. It's an incredible place where we are, and you can use all of that information. So if we are writing an article for a magazine about traveling to different places, we could talk about Bude being the ultimate summer destination, and we could talk about the things that we know. We could talk about the Sainsbury's Bude tunnel being 5 stars on TripAdvisor. Who wouldn't want to go to Bude tunnel? I mean, come on guys, it's the most incredible place, right? Who wouldn't want to go and have a fantastic milkshake from Rosie's, or you know, go and hang out at the venue and go bowling. Who wouldn't want to go to Crooklets or the Bude Sea Pool at Summerlees, or surf the waves at Widmouth, or walk the walk from Crackington to Millock, which is an incredible walk. You have got all of these places on your doorstep that you can talk about. I haven't even mentioned the golf course, of course. So there's loads of things that you can talk about. You could also think, nope, that question's not for me. Let me have a look at question 9. So for this paper, your school or college has invited letters from students on the following theme. It is essential to explore the extremes of our planet as long as we are not damaging it ourselves. Write a letter to the head teacher or principal giving your thoughts. So here we would start with Dear Mr. Wilkes, because we know him. We know our head teacher. You don't have to come up with a crazy name. You don't need to start thinking about weird and wacky things. You can talk about what you know. So do we want to explore the extremes of our planet? What are the extremes of our planet? Are we talking about the sea? Are we talking about, you know, the wild mountains? Are we talking about deserts? You know, think about making this question your own. But really, for me, the most important thing, and I said it in, you know, the last slide, you've got to remember the format. Are you writing an article? Are you writing a letter? Are you writing a speech? Or are you writing a guidebook or a review? And when you've identified that, think about who your audience is. Is it a letter to Mr. Wilkes? Is it an article in a magazine about the most crazy destinations you can visit? Is it a speech to your peers? Your peers are your year 11 students. You know, you are in year 11. So if it says your peers, we're talking about people who go to Bude Haven School. And sorry, why are you writing? What is the purpose of what you're doing? Who is this for? Why are you writing? And the purpose is always, always, always going to be persuade. You might be writing an article to review a concert you've been to, but you want to persuade people to go to that concert or like that music, or you might be writing an article for how to look after your cockapoo, and you might be persuading people that a cockapoo is the best thing that you could ever have in your life. It might be, and I'm going to really show my naivety here, you might be writing in a farming magazine talking about the best tractor, and you know, you are convincing, you're reviewing the most latest model of the tractor, but you are also trying to convince them that that is the best tractor that they could possibly buy. You might be talking about writing a speech to convince people that uniform is the most horrific thing in the world and we should all get rid of it. And you are trying to convince people of your viewpoint. Okay, so no matter what, whether you're being asked to advise or review or give your opinions, you always want to be at the forefront of your planning. Is you are trying to persuade people to agree with you. Okay, and that is the most important thing that you can possibly do. So speaking to a few of you today, one of the things that you really wanted from me was this idea of like a kind of a suggested structure. And I think for me, one of the things to really think about is everything that I've taught you in terms of what makes good writing. So I've taught you about establishing your idea. So if we're thinking about structuring our own writing, we can think about, let's use that EDAC structure that you know so well. So when you're thinking and you're sat there in the exam and you've got this task ahead of you, establish your ideas really early on. Why are you writing? Who are you writing to? What's the purpose? What are you trying to achieve? And then how are you going to do that? Whatever the prompt is, react to it. Make your viewpoint or your stance clear. So if it is about, oh, you know, you've read an article where peer pressure is shown to be a good thing, talk about that. I've read your article which said that peer pressure was a positive thing. I think this is absolutely abhorrent. I can't believe that you would write a letter, you would write an article and you would publish something that suggests that peer pressure could ever be a good thing. This is absolutely abominable. So we're thinking about really conveying that strong opening. You want to then further establish your ideas. And I really like the kind of imagine structure. So think about, imagine a world where, if we go with the peer pressure, so imagine a world where nobody feels shy of being who they are. Imagine a world where nobody feels pressured to do anything that they shouldn't do. Imagine a world where everybody is free to make their own choices and be accepted for who they are. Unfortunately, this is not our world. We have to imagine a world like this, because this is not the world that we live in. Ours is a world where, okay, so we're doing an imagine a kind of a utopia and then saying this is not our world. We're then going to develop that idea for a personal anecdote. So we're going to talk about the situation, but on a more human level. So rather than getting somebody to imagine a future, we're then going to talk about, what was my example from today? Little Jenny, who has to walk 26 miles to go and get water from a dirty spring. We're looking at think about the charity adverts where they give you an example of somebody who's living in that world and what their life is like. You can also use yourself. So when I've taught you this before, we did an example where we talked about the importance of PE. And I gave the example of when I started school, one of the things that we had to do was go and do cross country. And I remember, I'm actually, believe it or not, a very sporty person. And I remember the very first time we had to do cross country at my school. And we were sort of, it was lashing down with rain, the wind was howling, it was icy, it was freezing, and we were sort of marched out of the changing rooms after huddling for warmth in our kind of skin tight t-shirts and tiny little shorts, and off we set around the field 5 times, in the mud and the rain, and it was miserable. And it's like, how is this ever going to encourage anybody to love sport? So we're using the examples of ourselves to humanize the situation. Once we've done that and we've kind of tugged on the heartstrings, we've used our emotive language, we've got them to imagine the world, we might have used a few rhetorical questions in there, thinking about, how do you feel if this was you? We're then going to hit them with the reality. What are the facts, the stats, and the expert opinion? So, I'm going to give myself a doctorate now. So, Dr. Wilderspin from the University of Budehaven recently researched the effects of bullying in year 7 and found that over 68% of students at her school had been bullied by the time they'd got to December of their first year of school. Further research from let's give Mrs. Sweeting a lovely little doctorate as well. So Dr. Sweeting furthered this research when she looked at the lasting impact of bullying on adolescent children, and found that of those who had been bullied, at least 47% go on to self-harm or commit suicide. So we're going to take one opinion and one fact and one expert opinion, and we're going to then couple it like we do with our literature, and we take 2 quotes to support our point. We're going to make sure that we've got 2 expert opinions to support our facts. We're going to hit whoever our reader is, whoever our audience is, we're going to hit them with the reality, we're going to hit them with the facts, and I'm going to talk really, really carefully about those things. We're then going to amplify our point through a single paragraph list of 3. So this is outrageous, this is untenable, this is downright immoral. Obviously, you're not going to make the same capital letter mistake that I did there, because untenable wouldn't necessarily need a capital letter. But you're going to give that lovely list of 3. You're going to give those exclamatives. You're going to talk with passion about your subject. And then you're going to conclude in the same way that we taught you for the creative writing. You are going to conclude by linking it back to that imagine a world, imagine a world, imagine a world, because you want to show them how to solve the issue. So because if we work together to combat bullying in schools, if we raise awareness of where to get support, if we do this, little Jenny won't have to walk 27 miles for a bit of dirty water. Little Sarah, who is desperately struggling and is miserable and is alone and who is contemplating hurting herself, won't feel she has to do that, because whatever it is, you're going to link that back. Okay, so a nice little suggested structure for you there. You don't have to follow that exactly, but it gives you that idea of how to use EDAC to plan your own creative writing. The last thing from me before I let you just kind of reflect and take in everything that I've said in this video is I'm going to put this onto Google Classroom for you. I have got a lovely revision sheet here to look over tonight before the exam tomorrow. It's got some examples for you about powerful openings, persuasive phrases, emotive and impactful vocabulary. It's also got some sentence starters, so thinking about how you might introduce and develop your ideas in a little bit more detail. A little bit more information about a couple of the rhetorical devices that you might want to use, so the rule of 3, repetition, direct address rhetorical questions, and then it has some powerful endings there for you. So have a look at this. This bullet point: history will judge the decisions we make now. If not now, when? Together we can create meaningful change. So just maybe learning a couple of these sentences before tomorrow, that could be the difference. We're looking for every single mark mattering. And finally, the last bit that is on the sheet that I have put on Google Classroom for you is this kind of high-level phrases. So an issue of great significance, fueled by ignorance, rooted in inequality, phrases for a balanced argument, memorable vocabulary and boosters. It's all there for you to take away on Google Classroom, for you to look at, learn some of those things, have a think about how you might convey your own viewpoint. And the quick reminders for top marks: know your purpose, engage your reader, develop your ideas, vary your sentence structure, use that lovely ambitious vocabulary we've been teaching you over the last years at Butehaven, check your writing, remember the 16 marks for technical accuracy, and then really make sure that you are timing your paper. It is an enormous paper. Make sure that you give enough time to each of those sections and enough time to create your very well crafted, very knowledge informed writing questions. You guys are going to absolutely smash it tomorrow. I am so proud of you all. I can't wait to see what you've done. Good luck, everybody.